Hey coders, welcome to Coding Shouting with NJ. This is the third video in the series in which we are building REST-style e-commerce website from scratch without using any frameworks or libraries. We are using JavaScript for Frontend, PHP and MySQL for Backend, and communication between the two is done through Fetch API. And by the way, this web application is also being built as single page application as well. So there is a bunch of stuff that we are going to learn along the way. Now let's get to the business of third episode. Well, in our previous two episodes, we have completed our navigation, banner and footer. Now we are all set to implement these two sections, new arrivals and featured products. So in order to bring the products from the backend, we have to first of all define tables in the database table from where we have to fetch the data. So let's go and create those tables. We are going to create two tables. First table is going to represent categories and the second table is going to represent the products themselves. So let's go and create those tables. Okay, so the database that we have created for this project is eShop, and we have only created two tables in it so far. And I forgot that we have already created this categories table. Obviously we have created, that's why we were able to see those categories in the browser. How can I forget that? Never mind. So now we only have to create just one more table which is going to represent our products table. So let's create that. Right click on table, create table. Okay, let's give it the name product. The first column is going to be ID, integer type, primary key, and auto increment. The second one, let's give it a name category ID. Through this column, we are going to link the category of this product with one of the categories in the category table. So this is going to act as our foreign key. Let's make it int as well. Data type. It can't be null. Okay. Then we have the name of the product. Varchar is fine. It can't be null. Product name should be unique. Then the description for the product. Okay, it's for the description. Varchar, let's make it 255 characters. And maybe we can keep the description null as well. So let's move on. Let's give this one the name price. Let's give it decimal or float. Let's choose float. Okay. Then a column where we are going to store the path for the image, associated image with the product. Again, let's make it 255. Again, we are going to not include any mandatory properties, so it can be null if currently we don't have any image associated with it, so it can be empty. Then status, let's look for boolean and it will automatically select tiny int. Okay, it can't be null and the default value is 0. Then the date added on. Let's select date time, and the default value for this is going to be current date and time. So now function, and it can't be null either, but this is going to be automatically provided by the DBMS system itself. Okay, so we are done with the fields. Now we have to make our category ID field, this one, a foreign key with which we are going to link our categories table. So let's click on this foreign keys tab. Now we have to provide any name that we want to give this foreign key. So let's make it fk_1 foreign key 1, and we have to choose here a reference table. So we only have banners table and category table. So we are going to link this foreign key with the categories table. So eShop.category. The eShop is database and the category is one of its tables. And over here, this is the column from our current table, that is products table, that we want to turn into a foreign key. So this is the table that we want to turn into a foreign key, and from the reference column we have to select the one of the columns in the category table with which we want to link this foreign key. So we want to link it with the primary key of the category table. Okay. And over here it's saying that once the category table is updated, what shall happen to this associate foreign key. So if there are any rows in the product table whose category ID is linked to one of the categories in the category table, and then that ID is changed, then what shall happen? So if the value is updated, we want it to cascade. That means the effect should also be applied automatically to all the foreign keys in the products table. And what happens when that category is deleted in the category table? So if the category is deleted altogether, what should happen to the products that belong to that category? So if we select again cascade, then all the products that belong to that category will also be deleted. So we are going to select it to take no action, because we might not want to delete those products. Rather, we might want to change the category name for those products. So on delete, if the category is deleted, nothing should happen to the product associated with that category. However, if the category is updated, then that effect should also trickle down to the products table as well. Now let's click apply. So let's check that we have selected the correct options. It's going to create a table named product in eShop. ID is int not null auto increment, and this ID is also primary key. So where does it say this primary key? We haven't selected this, that's why we couldn't see the primary key option. Now let's click apply. Now over here it says our ID is a primary key. Then category ID int not null, and we are turning this category ID into a foreign key which references ID column of the categories table in eShop database. So on delete, no action should take place, and on update, the effect should trickle down to our products table. Okay, so we are happy with the statement. Now let's click apply and execute it. Finish. Let's refresh. Now we have a products table. Now let's start filling in some data in it. So basically we don't need to provide the IDs because it's going to be generated automatically. The category is supposed to come from our categories table. These ones. So the man has ID 1, women has ID 2, boy ID 3, and so on. So all the rows that you are going to fill in must have the values from 1 to 6, because if this row has the category ID 1, that means it belongs to men's category. If this row has a category ID 2, that means it belongs to women's category. Likewise, name, you can select any name. I'll be just saying boy 1, boy 2, girl 1, and girl 3, and likewise. Description again is going to be some random text. Price again, it's up to you. Images, I'll be providing the path to the images folder. So each category has different folder inside the images folder in our project, just like what we did with the banner table. Status, again I'll be putting 1 over here, otherwise it's going to be default to 0, which means it won't be returned in the HTTP reply, and added on is going to be again filled in automatically. So since there is no rocket science over here, and we have already covered this part in the part 2 as well, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to fill in this information and then we'll continue from there. Okay, so we have created all the categories. So in total we have 45 products. The products with category 1 are all men's category, and products with category ID 2 are all women's products, and with the category ID 3 are all boys products. Likewise, with category ID 4 we have girls products, category ID 5 babies products, category ID 6 accessories products. Okay, now we are all set to start working on our code. Since we are going to work on our new arrivals category and featured products category, which are both going to go as sections in the main element. So let's find out the main element. Okay, there it is. Now this is banner section. After this banner section, we have to define one section for the new arrivals and one section for the featured products. So we are going to make our new arrivals our second section. So let's create a section with the class name new arrivals. Let's create another section for the featured products. I'm thinking of making this featured products our second section. The reason for doing that is that since the contents of these featured products are going to be displayed randomly each time we refresh the page, whereas the products in the new arrival section are going to remain relatively static until new products are added in. So since this is going to make our website more dynamic and more different each time we refresh the page, so that's why I'm making this featured product second section and new arrivals our third section. So now let's start working on the featured section. So in the featured section, everything is going to be brought in and integrated dynamically through JavaScript once we have got the data from the backend. The only thing we are going to put here manually is the h3 element. Maybe let's make it h2. Okay, now let's put the text. Featured. Let's make it products as well. Featured products. Now the rest is going to be stitched in dynamically. So now we are going to work on our JavaScript through which we are going to make a request to the backend. So that means then we have to go and define the PHP logic, and then once we are able to get the featured products and display it in the browser, only then we'll be working on the styles. So this time the styling is going to come at the end. So let's go to JavaScript and make a request for the featured products to our backend. Now since these featured products should also be brought in the moment we enter the website address in the address bar. That means we again have to attach another event listener with DOM content loaded event of the document. So let's copy this and paste it. Now we only have to change the name of the event listener, event handler. So this time we are requesting featured products. So request featured, and since the logic is going to be almost same as the first two event handlers, so I'm going to copy this whole function, and at the bottom I'm going to paste it. So let me put it before this call carousel because this is kind of our helper function. So I'm going to paste it. Okay, now we have to go and change the name from request categories to request featured. We have to change the URL from the menu to featured.php. So that means we have to define this file in the backend. Then again, we are not sending any data, we are just requesting to pull in some featured products. So therefore the method is going to be get. Nothing changes over here. Once we get the reply, so this part is going to be changed. Okay, since this part is going to be different, that is once we receive the data, how are we going to display it and integrate it in the browser, so that part is going to be different. So we are going to comment out everything except for this console log data because we want to see in the console the data that we receive, and once we are certain that we have received the data, then we will figure out how to integrate it in our DOM. So this is the starting bracket. Let's go and check where it ends. Since this is wrapped in a rectangle, so that means this is currently selected, and that also means that its matching closing bracket will also be in this rectangle. So we have to look for that one. There it is. So that means that's the end. So we have to comment out everything in between. Since we want to keep the console.log statement, for the rest, comment out. Okay. So we are done with our front end. Wasn't it quick? Because actually the hard part, which is displaying it and integrating it in the DOM, is still left to be done. But for the time being, we are done with our front end code. Now let's go to the backend and create this file, feature.php. I didn't put the name over here. Feature.php. Now let's go to the backend. Now feature.php. Now for the backend, again we can actually copy one of the PHP files because we are going to make slight changes. The rest of the logic is going to remain same. So I'm going to copy the whole banner.php and paste it in the feature.php file. Now we have to change this SQL statement. So the first thing is that we have to change the table name from banner to product. That was the name that we gave to our table. And we are asking for everything where status equals 1. But now in order to make it dynamic so that each time it gives us 3 different products randomly, so we have to add some more tweaking to this statement. So if we are supposed to put like this, order by ascending, what that would have done, it would have returned all the tables in the product table starting from ID number 1 up to the last one. Had we put it descending, DESC, then it would have again returned all the rows, but starting from the highest ID number up to the number 1 ID in the bottom. If on the other hand we say order by and then call a function called rand, that means random. So what this is going to do is that it's going to assign random numbers to each of those rows, and then it can return those rows randomly. So there is no ascending order according to IDs, there is no descending order according to ID. Rather, all the rows are returned in random order. But we don't want all the rows. We are only interested in displaying just 3 products. So we can place limit 3. That's it. So in order to be certain that this is actually going to work, I'm going to copy this statement between the quotations, and let's go to our workbench, and over here let's paste it. So select everything from product, order by random. It says where is not valid at this position. Okay, now let's try to run this statement. So as you can see, we have only been returned 3 rows, which is limit 3. And let's check their IDs. One is ID number 45, one is ID number 44, and ID number 19. 2 are from the accessories category and 1 is from the women's category. So let's execute this statement one more time, and this time we are going to get different result. Okay, so ID 21, 6 and 8. One more time. 8, 6 and 11. So as you can see, every time it's returning us 3 different fields. So let me copy this and insert it back over here. Okay. And we are also certain that this statement executes properly because we have actually executed it in our workbench. So now let's look at the rest of the code and see what kind of changes do we need to do. So again, we have to keep everything over here. We don't need to make any changes over here, except for the associative array that we are returning as JSON object that need to have a different index name. Since we are returning featured products, so I'm changing it from banner to featured. And again, if something goes wrong, then this is the message which it gets displayed. Okay. So turns out we are done with our backend as well. Now let's go and check in the browser if we are able to get this data. 3 featured products. So let's refresh it and now look at the developers tools. Okay, this is featured product. The first one returns us the banner, second one returns us the categories. Now look into the featured products, featured object, sorry. And now the object that has been returned consists of one property named feature, named featured, and its value is an array which contains 3 elements, and each of these elements are objects themselves. So at index 0 we have this object with the category ID 2, description women's clothing, ID 14, images, and name, price, and everything. Now we have to bring this information and put it in the browser so that it's being displayed in the browser. Okay, so let's go and do it. So let's go to global.js, and over here let's remove everything. Now over here, first thing that we have to check is that we have to make sure, does this data, which is the main object that has been returned, does it contain a property named featured? So if it does contains a property named featured, that means we have actually got our products. Then we can go on and stitch them in the DOM. Otherwise, if we haven't got this featured property, that means we have got a reply from our backend, but it contains something else. So obviously we cannot assume that something else to be product and try to stitch them in the browser. So if, let me create a variable data.featured. So this way we only have to write featured. So if featured means if this featured contains data, then in that case it won't be null. In that case, we can define all the logic within these yellow curly brackets that is going to display these products in the browser. So before we write down any logic within this if block, let's go to the demo project and try to get an idea of what we are trying to build over here. So this is what we are trying to build. So for the new arrivals, we have one section for new arrivals, and then basically this is the card that we want to build, and likewise for the featured. So currently we are working on featured, but obviously you can see the logic is going to be the same. Okay, so let's look at one of these cards. So that means we are going to have at least one div which is going to contain each of these cards, and for each of these cards we are going to create within those cards at least two top level children. One is going to contain image and other is going to contain this information, the product's name and the price. So what we are going to do is that we are going to create one div, and we are going to give it class name catalog, because that div is basically going to represent the catalog of featured products, and within that div we are going to create these different cards for each of these products that we have received. So let's go back to our JS file. Now within this if block we have to define the logic. So the first thing is that we have to get reference to that section in which we are going to insert all of these elements. So since the section that we are targeting is featured section, we gave it the class name this featured products. So first of all we have to get a reference to this section. So const featured section document dot query selector, and the class name was featured products. Okay, since this featured is an object, let's go back to our console. Okay, now since the value of this featured property is an array, so that means we can iterate over it using for each loop. So featured dot for each, and since for each loop takes an arrow function which will be given one product at a time from the featured array, so now within the body of this arrow function we have to define the rest of the logic. So as we discussed, we need to create one div which we are going to assign the class name catalog, and since this catalog is going to be the div in which all the products are going to be appended, so that means that div must be defined outside the for each loop, otherwise it's going to be overwritten with each iteration. So const, let's keep it simple, catalog is document dot create element div. Let's give it the class name, same class name so that it's easier to remember. Okay, it felt incomplete. So now we have access to our featured section and we have created one div with the class name catalog. Now let's go inside the featured div, the for each loop, and within these curly brackets let's define the whole logic. So over here again we have to create one div with the class name card. This card is going to contain two divs as its children. In one div we will insert the product's image, and in another div we will display the product's name and price. So let's start with the card. So const card equals document.create element div. Let's give this card the class name card as well. We must assign those classes because using these class names we are going to define their CSS styling, as well as if we have to apply some processing using JavaScript, so we need to have some kind of unique identification for those. So therefore it's important to have class names assigned to them. Let's give it the class name card. Now let's create its two child divs. So const image div create element div, image div dot class name, let's make it card image. Let's create second child, which is description div, and let's give it the class name card description. Now let's attach these two divs to the card. So card.append child, the first child is going to be image div, and card.append child description div. But currently both of these divs are empty. So now we have to define an image element and attach that image to this image div, and we have to define two paragraph divs. One paragraph is going to contain the product's name and another one is going to contain the price. Those paragraphs are going to be attached to the second div, the description div. So now let's create image element. So const image is document.create element image. Now image.source equals, we are going to use a string interpolation, so backticks. Now we have to provide the URL where our image lies. So http localhost 8081. Now the next part is going to come from this product, which represents this whole object. So from this whole object we have to target this image property. So let's go down, and over here we have to define product.image. So this is going to contain the rest of the URL, which is going to be attached to this part. As a result, it's going to give us the URL where our image lies, and since this is an image, so another request will be automatically made to our backend and image will be automatically brought in. We don't need to do anything else. Now we can attach this image to our image div. So image div dot append child, and we are going to append this image. Now we have to define two paragraphs. One is going to contain the product's name and other one is going to contain the product's price, and we are going to attach those two paragraphs as children to description div. So const name p document.create element paragraph. Let's give it a class name. It's not name, it's name p. Let's create another paragraph and price p. Let's give it the class name product price. Now append these two paragraphs as children to description div. So description div dot append child name p, and then description div dot append child price p. Okay, that's it. Now outside this for each loop, this one, so when we reach over here, that means our catalog has been populated with different cards and each card represents one product. But this catalog is not yet stitched to our DOM, so we have to append this catalog div as a child to featured section. So featured section dot append child, and we have to attach this catalog div. That's it. I hope this will display all the images in the browser, though they are going to look ugly because we haven't defined any styling, but they will be there nonetheless, hopefully, fingers crossed. Doesn't seem to. Let's have a look. Cannot read properties of null, reading append child. So apparently it looks like this is the element which seems to contain value null, but it should contain reference to our featured section. So I wonder why. Got it. Since we are using query select and we are targeting featured section through class name, so we must put a dot over here. Without this dot, the query selector will look for an HTML element with the name featured products, and we don't have any HTML element with this name. So hopefully now everything will work fine and we will have an ugly looking products in our browser. We should have by now. So at least we don't have any error in the front end. And our back end seems to be working fine as well. The only thing that we need to check is, have we attached all these divs in the catalog div? So let's start from the beginning. In the for each loop, we are creating a div with the name card, assigning class name. Then we are creating another div, image div, assigning class name. Then description div, assigning class name. Then we are appending this image div and description div as children to card. Then we are creating an image, and to its source we are assigning this URL. Then we are attaching this image to our image div. Then we are creating name paragraph, a paragraph, giving it class name. Oh, text contents, where are the text contents? Okay. So name p dot text contents equals prod dot name, because this prod object contains all the fields for each of the product that we have received from the backend. Then we have to do the same for the price. So price p dot text contents equals, now this time we have to append $sign to the price that we have received. So I'm going to use backticks. So first $sign is for the symbol, and for the string interpolation, second $sign, curly brackets, and within those curly brackets prod dot price. Okay. Now we are attaching this name p to description div, price p to description div. Okay. So we have to attach the card to this catalog as well, because we have been creating cards but we have never attached it to the catalog div. So as the last statement in the for each loop, catalog dot append child, let's append the card element. I'm not making any promises, but hopefully this time we will be able to see the products in the browser. Let's go. Refresh. Okay. Now we can see the product. Now let's go down. This is product 1. Its name and price. This is product 2. Name and price. And this is product 3. Okay. Now let's refresh it, and hopefully we will see different images. Yep. This is one image, which this is the repetition. This is a different image. One more time. Okay. So we keep getting this image at least. Never mind. At least we know it's random. Now all that is left is that we have to give it styling so that these images look like these images. So let's go to our demo project and try to figure out what kind of styling shall we apply. Okay, the first thing is that the heading is in the center, so we have to bring our heading in the center as well. Currently the heading is left justified. Besides that, we have to give it some margins and paddings as well. And then for the catalog, we have to give it some padding, and then we have to define the display property to grid so that we can only get 3 products per row. And then for this we have to again set its display property. Okay, let's go to style.css. Now since this is going to be more like a general type of styling, which is going to be applied at many different places, so I'm going to go at the top, because at the top we have defined styling which is general. So we have root, then body and hidden. Since everything is inside the body element, so this is also kind of general. So I'm going to define all the styling for the catalog and cards over here. Catalog styling. Then let's start with H2. Now again, this H2 is going to be in the featured as well as the new arrivals. So this is also kind of general. Text align property to center. Now let's define text transform. Let's make it uppercase. Let's give it some margin. So for the top and bottom, we are going to make it 1 frame. Then we will see how much. Well, let's make it 1.5 frame. And for the left and right, let's put 0. Okay. Maybe we should capitalize it rather than uppercase. Okay, that's better. Now let's work on catalog. Since this catalog is going to contain different products in their own respective divs with the class name card, the first thing that we are going to do is that we are going to set its display property to grid, because we want to display 3 products per row. And to make that happen, we have to set another property, which is grid template columns. And since we want 3 products per row, so I'm going to use a function which is repeat. And this repeat takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is going to be the number of columns per row. So I want 3 products, so therefore 3. And then for the next parameter, we have to specify that whatever is the total width of the row in which these columns are being displayed, how much space shall be occupied by each of those columns. So I want it to have equal spacing. And here, since we are talking about columns per row, so that means this represents the width. So we are saying divide the total width into 3 parts and assign 1 part to 1 product. Then let's set margin to auto. This way, if there is any space still left, then these columns are going to be properly aligned in the center. Okay, now let's work on individual products which are represented through a div with a class name card. And since this card contains again 2 divs, one is representing the image and another is representing the price and the name of the product. So again, we are going to set its display property to grid, but this time instead of placing the elements in columns, we are placing the contents of this card div onto separate rows. So therefore, we have to set its grid template rows we have to select, because now we want each child in a separate row. And since we know that it has 2 children, however, the first child contains the image and second child contains the description. And since we are talking about different rows, that means over here we are talking about how much height shall be reserved for each of those elements. So we want to assign more height to the div which contains an image and less height to the div which contains description. So what we are going to do is that whatever is the total height which is being assigned to this grid, so we want to divide into 4 parts. Out of those 4 parts, we want to assign 3 parts to the image div and 1 part to the description div. So to say that, we are saying 3fr and 1fr. So total height is 3fr plus 1fr, that is 4fr. So whatever is the height, it's being divided into 4 parts. Out of those 4 parts, 3 parts are going to be assigned to the first child, which contains an image, and the 1 part is going to be assigned to the description div. We are going to assign margin 10% top bottom and 10% left and right, so that between those cards we can see some space around. Okay. Now let's go and have a look in the browser. Okay, so this is how it currently looks. This is first card div and its image, which is occupying a lot of space, and then this is the card second child. Then as we move towards the right, we can see the second child, our second card. And over here, okay, this is the third one. Now since this image is occupying a lot of space, because we haven't yet specified how much the image should scale with respect to its container. So now we have to do that. Now since we know that the image is inside another div which is named card image, so we are targeting an image which is inside a div with the class name card image. So remember, this is the class name that we gave to the div, which is the first child of this card. And within this div, the contents of this div are actually an image. So we are going to say max width 100% and then object width and set it to contain. So this will ensure that the image is scaled down such that it's going to fit in the container in which the image lies. Now let's go and have a look. Okay, so as you can see, the images have been scaled down to fit inside its parent div. Now we have to apply rest of the styling such that it creates this look. So first of all, let's go to the card, and we have already given it some margin. Okay, now let's give it background color, and the color is light steel blue. That's better, but we need to now give some margin to the card as well. Not margin, sorry, padding. The margin is already there. Padding, let's give top and bottom, let's say 5 pixels, and left and right make it 8 pixels. Okay, that's better. Probably we should also make top and bottom 8 pixels as well, so that we have same amount of padding all around it. Okay, so make it 8 pixels. Now we have to give it smooth edges, so border radius, let's make it 5 pixels. Okay, that's better. Now let's give the image smooth edges as well. Border radius again 5 pixels. Okay, now we have to define hover property such that when we hover over it, some box shadow should appear. Okay, so for the box shadow, we have to target this image hover pseudo class. So let me copy this, paste, and hover. Now in the hover pseudo class for the image which is inside the card image div, let's define box shadow. Now since we want the box shadow to appear all around, so therefore we have to set the vertical offset and horizontal offset values to be 0. Then for the buller, let's make it 20 pixels, and for the spread, let's make it 10 pixels, and for the color, we are using the primary color. Okay. Now let's try to hover over them. Okay, that's better. Now look at the width of each card in the demo. So they are slightly smaller than the one that we are building. So we are going to shrink the size of each card, and then if you notice, the blur effect over here is slightly more prominent than the one that we are giving. So to make it more prominent, what we are going to do is that we are going to decrease the padding that we have assigned to our cards in the project that we are building. Then perhaps this blur effect will be more prominent. So let's go and make those changes and see how it affects. Okay, so first of all, let's go up to the catalog div itself, because this is where all the divs or all the cards reside. So I'm going to set its width to 90% of viewport window. So this will decrease the overall width of the catalog in which all the cards reside, and as a result this will shrink the size of the cards as well. Okay, that's better. Now let's decrease the padding as well. So let's go to the card, and for the padding I have chosen 8 pixels, so let's make it 5 pixels. Yeah, that's better. Now the blur and spread effect is more prominent. Maybe we should decrease the width of the catalog even more. So let's make it 87% of the viewport window. Yeah, I think that's better. Okay, now we should work on styling the description div. So we simply have to bring them to the center, put some margins and paddings, and make the font size slightly bigger. Okay, so let's get to it. So let's go down, and since the class name for the second div is card description, I think. So since we have 2 paragraphs inside the card description, so that means here we can only set the margins and paddings. So let's first of all, let's go and target the paragraph itself. Let's make it text align center, and padding top and bottom, let's make it 10 pixels, and left and right 0. Yeah, that's better. Now we should have some space between the image and the description. So now let's target the card description div and simply give it some padding top. So padding top, let's give it 20 pixels. 25 pixels. Okay. Now we should target this font and slightly increase the size. So let's go back to the paragraph and font size, let's make it 1.2 rem. Yeah, that's better. Maybe we should also make sure that the name of the product is also capitalized. So text transform capitalize. Okay, so I think we are done with the styling the featured products. Now we have to work on the new arrival sections. So new arrival section is going to be exactly the same as featured products. The only thing different is going to be the name of the section in which we are going to insert these elements, and even at the back end the logic is going to be almost same except for this order by class, which in the case of featured products was random function, and in the case of new arrivals we are going to order the rows in descending order and then return the top 3 ones. So this means we are going to have almost the same code both at front end and back end. So let's look at the front end and try to figure out how can we refactor this code such that we don't have to rewrite the same code again. So the parts that are similar in both front end and back end, we are going to put them in a separate function, and then wherever we need to use that same code, we are going to call the function. So let's go to our JavaScript file and try to look for the code that can be refactored. So the first thing that we have to do anyway is we have to attach an event listener with the DOM content loaded event. So now over here, instead of requesting featured products, we are going to request new arrivals. Then let's go to the featured products. Sorry, request featured. So this is the function. Now even though we can see this repetition of fetch everywhere wherever we have made the request to the backend, so this part is same there as well, but for the time being we are ignoring this part and we are only focusing on this part once we get the data. So this second then clause, inside this second then clause everything is going to be almost the same for our new arrivals except for the name of the section in which we are going to insert these contents. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy all of this and comment this out. We have to comment this out from here, if featured. So we are going to comment this if section, and this is the yellow curly bracket. So this is where our if section ends. So copy. Now we have to put this whole logic in a separate function. So now what shall we call this function? Let's call it populate catalog. And this function as a parameter should take the data, the product that we want to populate in the catalog. So let's give it a class name product, and then the catalog name, let's make it just catalog. It's just these two things. Okay, now let's paste everything over here that we copied from the if block. So over here, instead of featured, we are saying if products, then next over here we were getting a reference to the section in which we want to insert this catalog. So now since we are turning it into a general function, so instead of getting a reference to this featured section directly inside the function, we are receiving a reference to it. In this way, if we want to insert the elements in the featured section, then this catalog will represent the featured section. If we want to insert the data in the new arrival section, then this catalog will represent the new arrival section. In fact, let's make it catalog parent, because we are creating a div with the catalog and then we will insert this catalog to this parent. So now this parent will represent the featured section for request featured function, and this will represent new arrival section for request new arrival function. So now we have commented this out. Now catalog, we are creating this div. Catalog, our class name is catalog. It's going to remain the same for every section. And we have to change this featured to this product because we changed the name. So products are for each. Everything is going to remain the same. Over here, instead of featured section, we are going to say catalog parent. The rest is going to remain the same. I hope I have changed everything. Now let's go back up and we have to get the reference to the section in which we want to insert this catalog. So in this particular case, in the case of featured, request featured, so we want the reference to featured section, and then next we are going to call populate catalog, and the first thing that we have to provide is going to be this featured. So since this feature contains the products, so we are passing this, and the second part is going to be the section in which we want to insert this catalog. So in this particular case, it's the featured section. So the catalog that is going to be created by this populate catalog function, once it has been populated with all the products which are coming from this featured variable or parameter, then the whole catalog is going to be inserted into this featured section. Now let's go and test it out in the browser and see if our refactoring is working. So let's refresh. Okay, so we are able to see it. So that means our refactoring is working. Now next time when we are creating this request new arrivals function, so we don't have to rewrite this whole code. Okay, so this function has shortened a lot. Now we have to do the similar logic for this function, request new arrivals. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy this function, request featured, copy, request new arrivals, start, request new arrivals, and let's paste it. Now let's go up, and over here we have to change the resource name from featured to, let's make it new arrivals. Then it's again going to be a get method. We will get a promise. We are converting it into JavaScript object, and then that object is being returned again as a promise. So the second then block, and over here again we have got data, but this time this data object is going to contain a property named new arrivals. So we have to make sure that this is the name that we give to our associative array in the backend. Okay, so let's change the variable name as well, new arrivals, copy, no need to copy, new arrival section. Instead of saying featured products, let's go and check the class name. This is new arrivals. Okay. New arrivals. Now we are calling populate catalog function, but we have to pass new arrivals variable as a first parameter and new arrival section variable as second parameter. And we are done with the front end logic for the new arrivals. Now let's go and define this file at the backend, new arrivals. New arrivals.php. Okay, now this new arrivals.php is going to be almost same as the featured file. So I'm going to copy everything and pasting it into new arrivals. Okay, now with the first thing that we have to do is we have to change the order by expression. So order by, what was the exact parameter? It's added on. Added on, and since we want the most recent one, so they are going to be at the bottom. So we are saying order by, added on, and descending. Then the next thing that we have to do over here is, instead of giving this associative array name featured, let's give it the name new arrivals. And with that, we are done with both front end and back end for our new arrivals section. And now let's go and have a look in the browser. Refresh. Nothing. So at 12, request new arrivals is not defined. Did we forget to change the name or made some spelling mistakes? Control F, new arrivals 1 of 1. So we have definitely made some mistake in the spelling where we are defining this function, which happens when you copy stuff. Oh, we haven't changed the name at all. So request new arrival. Now it says, okay, now we haven't got any error. This is featured products and this is new arrivals, but it doesn't have the heading. So to be certain that this is coming from the new arrivals, I have to refresh the page, and if I still get the same images, then that means this is actually coming from the new arrivals resource, because we are ordering it by the most recently added elements, and these are the most recently added elements. Now we have to figure out why did we miss the heading. Did we not give it to our new arrival section? Index.html. Oh yes, actually we haven't defined any h2 any element in this new arrival section. So new arrivals. Oh, okay. It should go over here. Okay, good. Okay, so we are done with the featured and new arrival section. Now we still have to work on our refactoring part, because we can already see repetition of fetch requests. Okay, so as you can see, we have 4 fetch requests, and this part is kind of same everywhere. So we have to try to refactor this fetch request as well. So let's go down and let's create a function. I'm going to give it function name fetch call. Okay, so this fetch call is going to take certain parameters. Let's go up and try to figure out what are mandatory for the time being. Later on, we will keep on updating this fetch call function as we progress further along this project and make requests other than this get, and then we will eventually have to handle the cost at the front end as well. So that means we have to add some more information in fetch request, but currently this is all the information we have. So we are trying to refactor this fetch call according to this request. So this fetch takes the endpoint, URL endpoint, where this request is supposed to go. And if you notice, in all of the 4 fetch requests, this part is same. The only thing different is the ending part, the actual file where this fetch request is supposed to go. So we can again extract this as a separate variable, a global variable that we can use in the fetch request, or we can make this variable in the fetch request as well. So let's try to do that. So we are going to make this a local variable. So const URL is localhost 8081, then user folder, and then backend, then slash. Okay, so this part is going to remain constant, so therefore I have created a constant with the name URL. Now this part is changing with every request, so we have to provide this as a parameter. And then again, this method is get, so we have 2 options. We can make this a local variable as well, but later on when we are using methods other than get, such as post, put, fetch, then we will have to provide the value for this method as a parameter. So it's a good idea to straight away make this method as a parameter as well. So the first function is going to be resource name, and the second is going to be method, and its default is get. So that means if we don't provide it, it's always going to be there. So far these 2 are the pieces of information that we currently have. So we are going to refactor this fetch request according to these 2 pieces of information. Let's make the fetch call. Now since we have this URL part and this endpoint part, so we have to concatenate them together to get the whole URL. So URL plus resource. Then the next part is actually an object, and currently we have just the method attribute, which is going to come from over here. Okay, so this is the method property of this fetch request, and this is its value, which is coming from this parameter. Okay, so next to this fetch, now we have to use then clause. The first thing is common in all of the 4 fetch requests, which is the response that we get. We have to call JSON method on it, and this will return us another then block. So let's create that then block. Here we will have actual data, and inside the body of this arrow function, which takes data as a parameter, and this data contains the actual response. Now we have to define the logic over here, and remember we have got things which are different. So let's put comments for the time being, but let's go down and put the sketch block, which will simply display the error in the console. Now we will think about what shall we place over here. Okay, so since this is the part where we are going to apply different logic depending on the reason we made this fetch request. So if we made this fetch request to get the categories, then we have to attach those categories in the header section. If we made this fetch request to get the new arrivals, then we have to call the method for the new arrivals ones. And if we made this request for the featured one, then obviously we have to apply different kind of logic. So that means over here we have to think how can we manipulate it. So that means once we enter inside this function, we have to think of how can we handle different situations, because situations are different in every fetch request when we reach this part. So what we are going to do is that instead of handling this part over here, we are going to call another function, and we will pass this data to that function, and that function is going to be different for each of these fetch requests. So that means, let's go back. So we have to call some function, let's say handle fetch response, and we will pass this data to that function. But This is again one function, but even that doesn't solve any problem because we are going to have different kind of data for different fetch requests. So we want to handle them differently. So that means putting a function name over here will not solve our problem. So what we are going to do is that when for this fetch call method, we are going to pass third parameter, which is going to be the function that is going to be called over here. So let's give it the name callback, and over here let's call this callback function and pass this data. Now this callback function can be different functions. So whichever function is passed at the time of calling this function over here, that function will be called inside the body and the data is going to be passed to that function. Now since this method parameter has a default value assigned to it, so that means this should come at the end. So when we assign a default value to any parameter, that parameter becomes optional. So that means at the time of calling this function, we can omit this parameter. And for those fetch requests which has a method get, we are going to omit that third parameter. So that's why it must come at the end. So any parameters that have default value assigned to them, they should always be at the end. Okay, now let's go up. Let's start with the fetch request for the categories. So over here we were sending a fetch request to get the categories. So what we are going to do over here is that since this part, so basically everything inside this function, I'm first of all commenting this out. So now our request categories function is basically a function with empty body. Now let's call this function fetch call, and since this part is coming from the URL, which is a local parameter to this fetch request, so we only have to provide menu.php. Then second parameter should be the function which is going to be called once we get the reply from the server. So since this is the request category and that callback function is going to handle the data that we are going to receive from the server, so I'm going to call this function response categories. Now I'm going to define this function response categories as a local function to this request categories. That means this function is going to be defined inside the request categories function. Now this function is going to get the data that has been returned from the server. So now over here we have to basically define all the logic that handles that data, which was this one. So everything in between these brackets, this curly bracket. So basically let's start with navigation. Copy, we need to copy this bracket as well, so copy. Now paste it over here and let's unblock it. Okay, so we got the data. We are getting reference to navigation. So if data contains a property called categories, then we are creating UL and appending this. Okay, so that's it. Everything should work fine now. Now let's go and test it out in the browser. Okay, so categories are not visible. Okay, for some reason this user and front end is getting attached to this URL. So let's try to figure out why this is happening. Okay, so I have identified the problem, which is I forgot to put double slash over here. Okay, now we can clearly see the category, so that means our first page call is working. Now let's go up and clear this part. Okay, so as you can see, our code has shortened by a great degree, and when we apply this refactoring to the rest of these three fetch requests, so it's going to get even short. So basically what we are going to do is that inside the function which was making fetch request, we are basically using this facade. This is called facade design pattern, in which this function is kind of hiding all the nitty-gritties of the fetch call, and we are just given with this simple one statement. And behind the scenes, the actual fetch request is making the call, but we don't know about that. Only inside this function, all those nitty-gritties are defined, so we don't have to define those nitty-gritties everywhere. Okay, now since we have passed this function as a callback, so that means the actual fetch request, once it gets the data, it's going to call this function, and when this function is called, it will get the data which has been received from the server. So over here inside this response function, for the response categories function, we are defining all the logic which attaches the categories into our DOM. Now we have to do the similar logic for the get category products. Oh, sorry, we haven't yet defined it. We have to do this. We have to define the similar logic for request banner. So again, let's first of all comment out everything which is inside the banner function. Now let's use this function call fetch, and we have to pass the actual resource that we are interested in, which is banner.php. Then over here we have to define the callback function. So since this will return us the response back from the server related to the banners, so response banner, and again let's make this an inner function. So function response banner, and this will have been passed the data from the server. Over here we have to define this logic over here. So if data.banner, then everything. Copy and paste it over here. And comment. So let's go and check if we are still able to see the banner. Good. So we can see the banner over here, so that means this refactoring is working fine as well. Now let's go down and remove everything. Now let's work on the request featured call. So over here again, let's comment out everything which is inside this request featured function. And since we have already applied one set of refactoring, so this one looks smaller than the other two calls, and we are going to make it even more smaller. So fetch call, now resource, which is feature.php, then callback function, so response featured. Now inside this, let's make this local function or inner function. Response feature, this will receive all the data returned from the server, and over here these 3 lines of code. Copy, paste. Now since this featured function had already been one set of refactoring applied in the form of this popular catalog function, that's why it's very small. Now let's go and check in the browser if everything is working fine. Good, we are still able to see the featured products, so it's working. Good. Okay, so let's erase everything which we already had commented out. Okay. Now let's apply the refactoring to the request new arrivals as well. So again, the first thing, let's comment out everything between curly brackets. Fetch call, and let's provide the URL endpoint, which is new arrivals.php. Now let's provide the callback function, which is response arrivals. And let's define this response new arrivals as inner function. So function response new arrivals, and it will receive data from the backend. Now again, just these 3 lines of code: copy, go up, paste, uncommit. Let's go and have a look. Okay, so we can see new arrivals, so that means it's working as well. Now let's delete these comments. Okay, so everything is working, and as you can see, we have much less code than we had before. Now, even though we are done for today, I made one small mistake in my second tutorial, so let's go and fix that. That mistake was basically in my CSS, which was in the footer section. Basically, I had defined some transitions, such as when I hover over it, the list item should change color and smoothly get slightly bigger. But as you can see, it's not happening smoothly. This transition is not happening smoothly, rather it's happening quickly. That's because while defining this transition, instead of using the word transition, I used the word transform. So we need to go and change that property from transform to transition, which is over here. So I have to set it to transition, and I have to change the time from 3 seconds towards 1 second. Otherwise, it's gonna take ages to get this transition completed. Refresh. Let's go down. Okay, now as you can see, this is much smoother. Okay, so with that, we are done with today's target as well. In the next episode, we will be working on bringing in the categories related data, and it's going to be much easier because we have to basically apply the same styling logic over here and the same way to integrate this catalog into our HTML page. So everything is more or less complete. Just a smaller minor things that we have to do, and then we will be done for that part as well. So until then, you can keep watching my other videos as well, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. Thank you so much.